The emergency room door slammed open as Clint Todd carried his 6-year-old son through the entrance, the boy's small body limp in his arms. Jake's fever had spiked to 104 during the night, and when he started having trouble breathing, Clint hadn't hesitated. He'd grabbed his keys and driven straight to Mercy General, his hands steady on the wheel, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "I need help." Clint's voice cut through the sterile waiting room. "My son, he can't breathe right." Nurses materialized around them, lifting Jake onto a gurney with practiced efficiency. They wheeled him through double doors before Clint could follow, leaving him in the fluorescent glare of the waiting room. A woman with a clipboard appeared, asking questions he answered mechanically while his eyes stayed locked on those doors. "Name, insurance, medical history, emergency contact. Your wife?" the woman asked. "Should we call her?" "She's out of town," Clint said. "Business trip in Seattle. I already texted her." The woman's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been sympathy or judgment. Clint couldn't tell. He'd stopped trying to explain his marriage to strangers. Vanessa traveled constantly for her family's foundation. The Griffith Foundation, established by her grandfather in the 1950s, now managed by her father Stanley. Charitable work, they called it. Networking events, fundraising galas, board meetings in expensive hotels. Clint had been a project manager at a construction firm when they met. 5 years later, he still was. The Griffiths had never quite forgiven their daughter for marrying beneath her station. An hour crawled by, then two. Clint paced the waiting room, his work boots squeaking on the linoleum. He'd come straight from the house in jeans and an old flannel shirt, hadn't even thought to change. Around him, other families waited with their own terrors, their own prayers. Finally, a doctor emerged. "Mr. Todd? I'm Dr. Reynolds. Your son has a severe respiratory infection. We've stabilized him, but there are complications." Clint's stomach dropped. "What kind of complications?" "His airways are inflamed, more than we'd expect from a standard infection. We need to run more tests, but there's a possibility of an underlying condition. Something chronic." Dr. Reynolds hesitated. "I've consulted with a specialist. Given the severity, surgery may be necessary to place a permanent airway device." Permanent. The word felt heavy in Clint's mouth. A tracheostomy. It would ensure he can breathe if the inflammation becomes life-threatening. The doctor's tone was carefully neutral. "I understand this is frightening, but we want to be prepared for every scenario." Clint ran a hand through his hair. "Can I see him?" "Soon. Right now, he's resting. The sedatives are keeping him comfortable." Dr. Reynolds touched his shoulder. "We'll take good care of him." After the doctor left, Clint called Vanessa. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Clint? What's wrong?" Background noise filtered through, voices, laughter. A party or reception of some kind. "Jake's in the hospital. Respiratory infection. They're talking about surgery." Silence. Then, "Oh my God. Is he? He's stable." "But Vanessa, they mentioned a tracheostomy. Something permanent." More silence. "I need to call my father. He knows the best doctors. Just don't do anything until I get there, okay? I'm catching the red eye tonight. Dad and Mom will probably come too." Of course they would. Stanley and Dolores Griffith, swooping in to take control. Clint wanted to argue, to tell her they didn't need her family's intervention, but Jake's pale face flashed in his mind. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Fine," he said. "Just hurry." The night nurse let him sit beside Jake's bed around midnight. The boy looked impossibly small against the white sheets, an oxygen mask covering his face. Clint held his hand and talked quietly about nothing. The Cardinals game they'd watched last weekend, the treehouse they were building in the backyard, the camping trip plan for summer. At 3 a.m, Stanley Griffith arrived with his wife. Clint heard them before he saw them, Stanley's booming voice echoing down the corridor as he spoke to hospital staff. The man had a presence that demanded attention. Tall, silver-haired, expensively dressed even at this hour. "Clint." Stanley's handshake was firm, perfunctory. Dolores kissed the air beside Clint's cheek, her perfume overwhelming. "Where's Vanessa?" Clint asked. "She'll be here by morning." Her flight had a delay. Stanley was already looking past him, toward Jake's room. "We've arranged for Dr. Marcus Chun to consult. He's the chief of pediatric pulmonology at St. Catherine's. If surgery is necessary, he's the one to do it. Dr. Reynolds hasn't said it's definitely necessary. Dr. Reynolds is perfectly competent for routine cases, Dolores interrupted smoothly. But Jake is our grandson. He deserves the absolute best. They swept into Jake's room, and Clint followed, feeling once again like an outsider in his own family. Stanley spoke with the night nurse, asking questions with the confidence of someone accustomed to immediate answers. Dolores stood by Jake's bedside, one manicured hand resting on the rail. "Poor baby," she murmured. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Grandma's here now." Clint's jaw tightened. Jake was his son. He'd been the one here all night, the one who'd rush him to the hospital, the one who'd held him when he couldn't breathe. But pointing that out would only start a fight, and Jake didn't need that. By dawn, Dr. Chun had arrived, a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses and an air of competence. He examined Jake thoroughly, reviewed the charts, conferred with Dr. Reynolds. When he emerged from the consultation, his expression was grave. "The inflammation is concerning," he said, directing his words primarily to Stanley. "Given the rapid progression and your grandson's history of respiratory issues." "He doesn't have a history of respiratory issues," Clint interrupted. "He had bronchitis once, 2 years ago." "That's it." Dr. Chin glanced at his tablet. "According to the records provided by the family, he's had multiple episodes." "What records?" "I'm his father." "I know." An uncomfortable pause. Stanley stepped forward. "Clint, you work long hours. Vanessa handles most of Jake's medical appointments. Perhaps some things slipped past you." The implication hung in the air. Bad father, absent father, negligent father. Clint's hands clenched into fists. "I want to see these records." "Of course," Dr. Chin said quickly. "But right now, we need to make a decision about treatment. Given the severity, I'm recommending the surgical intervention. A permanent airway device would eliminate the risk of... I need to talk to my wife first." Naturally, Stanley's smile didn't reach his eyes. Vanessa should be landing within the hour. "But Clint, you need to understand, delay could be dangerous. Every hour we wait, Jake's condition could deteriorate." Clint looked through the window at his son, so small and vulnerable. Fear coiled in his chest, squeezing tight. What if Stanley was right? What if waiting was the wrong choice? "I'll wait for Vanessa," he said finally. The Griffiths exchanged a glance. "Of course," Dolores said. "We understand. Family decisions should be made together." But something in her tone made Clint's instincts prickle. He'd spent 5 years navigating the subtle currents of Griffith family politics, learning to read the things left unsaid. And right now, every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. He just didn't know what. Not yet. Vanessa arrived at 8:30, looking exhausted and elegant even in travel clothes. She embraced Clint briefly before hurrying to Jake's room, her parents following. Clint watched through the window as she stroked Jake's hair, tears streaming down her face. When she emerged, her expression was determined. That explained everything. "Dr. Chun is the best. We should do the surgery." "Vanessa, can we talk?" Privately, they found an empty consultation room. Clint closed the door. "Something doesn't feel right. This doctor is talking about a history of respiratory problems Jake doesn't have. And this surgery, it's permanent. Shouldn't we get a second opinion?" Dr. Chun asked the second opinion. Vanessa's voice was tight with strain. "Clint, I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But my parents have connections to the best medical professionals in the state. We need to trust them. Your parents never wanted me in this family. You know that. This isn't about us. This is about Jake." She pressed her hands to her face. "God, can you think about someone besides yourself for once?" The accusation stung because it was exactly what the Griffiths had always implied, that he was selfish, that he wasn't good enough, that Vanessa had made a mistake. "Fine," Clint said quietly. "But I want to see those medical records Dr. Chin mentioned. I'll ask Dad to get copies." Vanessa opened the door. "They're preparing the consent forms now. Dr. Chin wants to do the surgery this afternoon." This afternoon, less than 12 hours since they'd arrived at the hospital, and already they were talking about permanent surgical intervention. Clint's unease grew stronger, but what choice did he have? Everyone else, the doctors, Vanessa, her parents, They all agreed this was necessary. Maybe he was the one who was wrong. He was signing paperwork at the nurse's station when someone grabbed his arm. Clint looked down to find a young man in scrubs, barely out of medical school by the look of him, with dark circles under his eyes and fear etched across his face. "Don't sign," the intern whispered urgently. His name tag read, "Brian Rivers, MD. Your wife's family requested this procedure. It's not what they told you." Clint's blood went cold. "What?" Brian glanced over his shoulder, then pulled Clint toward an alcove away from the main corridor. His hands were shaking. "I'm risking my career telling you this, but I can't. I won't be part of this. The surgery they want to do, it's not medically necessary. Your son has a bad infection, yes, but it's treatable with antibiotics and observation. The tracheostomy would cause complications. Deliberate complications. That's insane. Why would? I don't know why, but I saw the initial consultation notes from Dr. Chun. He documented that your son's condition is serious but manageable. Then 2 hours later, after meeting with Mr. and Mrs. Griffith, those notes were revised. Suddenly the surgery became urgent. Clint's mind raced. That doesn't make sense. There's grandparents. I know how it sounds. Brian's voice was barely audible, but I reviewed the case independently. This surgery shouldn't happen. And there's something else, security footage from last night. I saw it by accident when I was in the admin office. Your in-laws were in the medication storage area. They shouldn't have been there. Show me. I can't access it now. I'm not supposed to have seen it at all, but you can request it. You're the father. You have rights." Brian pressed a piece of paper into Clint's hand. "This is the name of the hospital's patient advocate. Tell them you want to see all documentation related to your son's case, including security footage. And don't sign anything until you do." Before Clint could respond, Brian hurried away, disappearing around a corner. Clint stood frozen, the unsigned consent form in one hand and Brian's note in the other. Everything in him wanted to dismiss this as paranoia. But that voice in his head, the one that had been whispering warnings since Stanley arrived, was now shouting. He pulled out his phone and called the patient advocate's office. The woman who answered was professional but firm. He could file a request, but it would take time to process. Hours, maybe days. Jake didn't have days. Clint made a decision. He walked back to the nurse's station and handed over the consent form. "I need 24 hours before we proceed with any surgery." The nurse frowned. "Sir, Dr. Chun indicated this was urgent. I'm a father. I'm not refusing treatment. I'm delaying a permanent surgical procedure until I can review all the documentation." He kept his voice calm but firm. "If Jake's condition deteriorates, we'll reassess. But right now, he's stable on antibiotics and oxygen. So we wait." Within minutes, Stanley appeared. "Clint, what's this nonsense about delaying? I want a third opinion. I want to see those medical records showing Jake's respiratory history." Stanley's expression hardened. "You're putting your son at risk because of paranoia. I'm protecting my son. That's my job." Clint met the older man's eyes. "If everything is as straightforward as you say, then waiting 24 hours won't matter. But if I'm right, if something's wrong, then I just saved Jake from unnecessary surgery." For a moment, something flickered across Stanley's face. Anger? Fear? It was gone too quickly for Clint to identify. "You're making a mistake," Stanley said coldly. "But he's your son. For now." The threat in those last two words was unmistakable. Clint didn't care. He returned to Jake's room and settled into the chair beside the bed. Through the window, he could see the Griffiths in heated conversation with Vanessa. His wife's body language was defensive, uncertain. Whatever her parents were saying, she wasn't entirely convinced. Good. Maybe she'd listen to him, after all. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Todd? This is Linda Pack from Patient Advocacy. I expedited your request. We found something unusual in the security logs from last night. Can you come to administration?" Clint looked at Jake, still sleeping peacefully under the oxygen mask. He caught the eye of Jake's nurse, a kind woman named Carol who'd been on duty since midnight. "Will you stay with him? Don't let anyone take him for any procedures without my authorization." Carol nodded. "I'll be right here." The administration office was on the second floor. Linda Pack was a small woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She closed the door behind Clint and gestured to a computer screen. "This footage is from 2:47 a.m., she said. "The restricted medication storage on the 4th floor." The video was grainy but clear enough. Stanley and Dolores Griffith stood in a hallway, and with them was a hospital employee in scrubs. Not medical staff, but someone from the pharmacy department. Money changed hands. Not subtly, not hidden. Stanley handed over a thick envelope, and the pharmacy employee nodded, pocketed it, and disappeared into the medication storage room. "What were they buying?" Clint asked, his voice tight. "That's what concerns me. I checked the access logs. Right after this exchange, several medications were accessed from your son's designated storage. Medications he wasn't prescribed." "What kind of medications?" Linda hesitated. "Immunosuppressants. Drugs that would interfere with his body's ability to fight the infection." "Mr. Todd, if those were administered, they'd make his condition appear much worse than it actually is. It would make the surgery seem necessary when it isn't." The room seemed to tilt. Clint gripped the edge of the desk. "They were trying to make him sicker. I can't prove that's what happened. But combined with the irregularities Dr. Rivers reported and the changed medical documentation." Linda met his eyes. "Mr. Todd, I think someone is trying to harm your son. Or at least create a situation where harmful intervention seems justified." "Why?" The question burst out of him. "They're his grandparents. Why would they?" "I don't know. But I've contacted hospital security and legal counsel. This is now officially under investigation." She pulled out a business card. "This is Detective Marcus Wade with the police. He specializes in medical fraud cases. I've already briefed him." Clint took the card with numb fingers. His in-laws. The people who'd held Jake at his christening, who'd bought him extravagant birthday presents, who'd smiled in family photos. They'd tried to hurt him. But why? His phone rang. "Vanessa." He answered. "Clint, where are you?" "Dad is furious. He's threatening to petition for emergency custody, saying you're endangering Jake by refusing treatment." Her voice was high-pitched, panicked. "Please, just sign the forms. I can't deal with them right now." "Vanessa, listen to me carefully. Your parents bribed a hospital employee last night. They had medications tampered with. They've been trying to make Jake sicker to justify a surgery he doesn't need." Silence. "Then, that's insane. I have video evidence. The hospital has launched an investigation. And I need to know, did you know? Were you part of this?" "Part of what?" "Clint, you sound paranoid. Answer the question." "No." She was crying now. "I don't know what you're talking about. My parents wouldn't. They love Jake. They love us. Do they love you? Or do they love controlling you?" Clint's voice was harsh. "Think, Vanessa. Why would they want Jake to need permanent medical intervention? What would that give them?" Another long silence. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was small. "Custody. What?" 6 months ago, Dad's lawyer updated his will. I saw it when I was at their house. Jake is the primary beneficiary of the Griffith Foundation Trust, but only if he's under the care of family members deemed fit to manage his interests. She drew a shaky breath. There was a clause about medical necessity. If Jake required specialized long-term care, the trustees could petition for custody to ensure proper management of his medical needs and inheritance. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. The Griffiths had never accepted Clint. They'd tolerated him for Vanessa's sake, but they'd been waiting for an opportunity. Jake was the heir to the Griffith fortune, the grandson who'd carry on the family name and legacy. But not if he was being raised by a working-class construction manager who'd never fit into their world. Make the boy sick. Make it permanent. Prove the father was negligent or incapable. Seize custody. Control the heir. It was monstrous, and it was perfectly legal if they could pull it off. "Where are you right now?" Clint asked. "With my parents. They wanted to discuss, oh God." Her voice broke. "They wanted to discuss the custody petition. They have papers drawn up. They said it was just a precaution in case you became unstable. But get away from them. Now, meet me in Jake's room." "Clint, they're my parents. They tried to kill our son. To make him sick. You said it yourself. They needed him alive, but dependent. They wouldn't actually, but she couldn't finish the sentence. The doubt was there now, poisonous and growing. "Vanessa, please. Trust me. I'm coming." The line went dead. Clint ran back to Jake's room. Carol was still there, and thank God, Jake was exactly as he'd left him. The boy's breathing was even, his color better than it had been hours ago. The antibiotics were working. "No one's been in?" Clint asked. "Dr. Chun came by to check on him, but I explained you'd authorized no procedures." He wasn't happy, but he left. 5 minutes later, Vanessa arrived. Her face was pale, her perfect makeup smudged. She looked at Jake, then at Clint, and something in her expression crumbled. "I want to see the footage," she whispered. They went to Linda Pack's office together. Vanessa watched the security video in silence, her hand pressed to her mouth. When it finished, she closed her eyes. How could they? The words were barely audible. How could they? Because they never saw Jake as his own person, Clint said quietly. "He's an heir, an asset to be managed, and I'm the obstacle." Vanessa was trembling. "What do? We protect our son, and we make sure they pay for what they try to do." Detective Wade arrived within the hour. He was a tall black man with a weary expression and careful eyes. He interviewed Clint and Vanessa separately, took copies of the security footage, and reviewed Jake's medical files with the hospital's legal team. "This is preliminary," he warned them, "but there's enough here for an investigation. Medical fraud, attempted child endangerment, possibly more depending on what we find. But the Griffiths are influential people. This won't be simple." "I don't care how complicated it is," Clint said. "They try to hurt my son." Wade nodded. "I believe you. But here's what's going to happen next. They'll lawyer up immediately. They'll claim the footage is being misinterpreted, that any medication irregularities were accidents, that their concern for Jake's health is genuine. They might even turn this around and claim you're the negligent one for refusing medical treatment. So they get away with it?" Vanessa's voice was sharp. "I didn't say that, but you need to be prepared for a fight." Wade looked between them. "In the meantime, the hospital is restricting the Griffiths' access to Jake. They can't make medical decisions without both parents present. And I'd suggest you consider getting your own attorney. This is going to get messy." After Wade left, Clint and Vanessa sat together in Jake's room. The sun was setting, painting the walls golden. Their son slept peacefully, unaware of the war being waged over him. "I should have seen it sooner," Vanessa said. "All those times Dad insisted on being involved in Jake's medical appointments. Mom always wanted to be the one to take him to checkups. I thought they were just being helpful. They're your parents. You trusted them. They try to hurt my baby." She looked at Clint, and her eyes were hard. "I'm done. Whatever they do, whatever threats they make, I'm done with them." It was a start, but Clint knew it wouldn't be enough. The Griffiths wouldn't simply accept defeat. They had money, influence, and decades of experience manipulating systems to their advantage. A police investigation could take months, and in the meantime, they'd be working to undermine Clint and Vanessa at every turn. No, waiting for justice wasn't good enough. Clint had spent 5 years watching the Griffiths operate, studying their methods, learning their weaknesses. He'd been quiet, letting them believe he was simple beneath their notice. But he wasn't simple. He was patient. And now, he was going to show them exactly what happened when you threatened his family. Jake was discharged 3 days later with a prescription for antibiotics and a clean bill of health. Dr. Reynolds confirmed that the respiratory infection was clearing up nicely and there was no need for any surgical intervention. Dr. Chun had mysteriously become unavailable for follow-up, and hospital administration quietly suggested they might want to find a new pediatrician elsewhere. The Griffiths had been banned from the hospital pending the investigation. Stanley's lawyers had already filed complaints and threatened lawsuits, but Detective Wade was thorough and determined. More evidence had emerged. Text messages between Stanley and the bribed pharmacy employee, falsified medical records, a paper trail of payments designed to look like charitable donations, but that corresponded suspiciously with Jake's hospital visits. But Clint knew the legal system was slow. The Griffiths had already begun their counterattack. A story had appeared in the society pages suggesting family tensions over medical decisions. Whispers circulated through Vanessa's social circles that Clint was unstable, controlling, paranoid. The Griffith Foundation's PR team was working overtime to protect the family's reputation. Clint let them think they were winning. He took a week off work, ostensibly to care for Jake. Really, he was making calls, reviewing documents, and reaching out to people who'd been hurt by the Griffiths over the years. Because a family that's successful and ruthless didn't get that way without leaving bodies in their wake. He started with Brian Rivers, the young intern who'd risked his career to warn him. They met at a diner far from the hospital. Brian looked exhausted, jumping at shadows. "They tried to have me fired," he said without preamble. "Claimed I was spreading false information about patients. If it wasn't for Dr. Reynolds backing me up, I'd be done." "I'm sorry," Clint said. "You did the right thing." "Did I? I'm probably going to lose my residency anyway." The Griffiths donate millions to Mercy General. The hospital administration is trying to distance themselves from the scandal, which means anyone involved becomes expendable. What if I told you there was a way to make sure they couldn't hurt your career? That we could expose them so thoroughly that their donations wouldn't matter? Brian's eyes narrowed. "I'm listening." Clint pulled out a folder. Inside were printed emails, communications between Stanley Griffith and various hospital board members over the past 5 years. He'd obtained them through a connection at the construction firm, a guy who'd done security system installations at the hospital and still had access to the network. The Griffiths don't just donate to the hospital, Clint explained. They use those donations as leverage. Look at this. Stanley threatening to withdraw funding unless a doctor who reported concerns about their behavior was reassigned. Here, Dolores demanding preferential treatment for family members, including access to restricted areas. They've been manipulating the hospital for years. Brian read through the documents, his expression darkening. This is huge. Have you shown this to Detective Wade?" "Not yet, because if I hand it to the police now, it becomes part of a slow legal process. The Griffiths will bury it in motions and delays. But if this information were to leak to the press, say, through a concerned medical professional who witnessed patient abuse, it would be much harder to contain. You want it to go public. I'm asking if you'd be willing to, with documentation to back you up. The hospital can't fire you for whistleblowing on genuine misconduct, especially if it becomes a major news story. You'd be protected." Brian was quiet for a long moment. "They try to hurt a kid, a 6-year-old, to get custody and money." He looked up. "Yeah, I'll do it." The next person Clint approached was Nina Griffith, Vanessa's younger sister. Nina had always been the black sheep of the family, too creative and wild for Stanley's rigid expectations. She'd moved to New York for art school and visited rarely. Clint had always liked her, though they'd never been close. He called her from a burner phone. "Nina, it's Clint. I need to talk to you about your parents and what they did to Jake." There was a long pause. "Vanessa told me. I couldn't believe it. I need your help." Another pause. "Why would I help you?" "I mean, I believe they're capable of it. Dad's been controlling and manipulative my whole life. But going against them? You know what that means. It means getting cut off financially. Disinherited. Ostracized from the family." Clint kept his voice steady. "But it also means stopping them from hurting people. Your nephew. Maybe your sister. Who knows who else? What exactly are you asking me to do? Tell me about the foundation. The Real Foundation, not the charitable facade. I know there are things that don't add up. Donations that disappear. Projects that never materialize. Your dad's been using that foundation for something, and it's not just tax benefits." Nina laughed bitterly. "You're smarter than they gave you credit for. Yeah, the foundation's dirty. I figured that out years ago. That's part of why I left. I didn't want to be involved in whatever they were doing. Can you prove it?" "Maybe. I still have access to some old files from when I worked there during college. Dad never bothered revoking my credentials. I think he forgot I had them. But if I use them, he'll know. By the time he knows, it'll be too late." Nina was quiet for so long Clint thought she'd hung up. Then, "Okay, but I want something in return. When this is over, I want Vanessa and Jake safe. Can you promise that? That's all I've ever wanted. Then you've got yourself a deal." The third piece came from an unexpected source, Detective Wade himself. Wade called Clint on a Saturday morning. "Mr. Todd, can you come to the station? There's someone here who wants to talk to you." The someone was Edna McCarthy, a woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and a fierce expression. She sat in the interview room with the bearing of someone who'd spent her life fighting. "Mrs. McCarthy lost her grandson 7 years ago," Wade explained. "Medical malpractice at Mercy General. She's been trying to sue for years, but the case keeps getting tied up in court. The Griffith Foundation donated a new wing to the hospital right after my lawsuit was filed, Edna said. Her voice was hard. Suddenly, doctors who'd been willing to testify changed their minds. Records disappeared. My lawyers got pressured to drop the case. And my grandson stayed dead. Clint felt cold. The Griffiths were involved. Stanley Griffith was on the hospital board, is still on the board. He made sure that lawsuit never went anywhere because it would have exposed problems in the pediatric unit, the same unit his family uses for their precious grandchildren. Can't have bad publicity affecting his family's health care. She pushed a folder across the table. I've spent 7 years digging into the Griffiths. Every dirty deal, every bought official, every covered-up scandal. I was never able to do anything with it because I'm just one old woman without resources. But you got them scared. They're making mistakes. And mistakes can be exploited. Clint opened the folder. Inside was a roadmap of corruption. Names, dates, financial transactions, testimonies from people the Griffiths had silenced or paid off. It was damning. It was comprehensive. It was perfect. Why are you giving this to me? Clint asked. Because you can finish what I started. Edna's eyes were bright with something that might have been hope or vengeance or both. Make them pay. Not just for what they did to your boy. For everyone they've hurt. By the end of the week, Clint had assembled his arsenal. Brian Rivers would go public with the hospital corruption story, backed by documented evidence. Nina would leak the foundation's financial irregularities to a journalist she knew who specialized in exposing charitable fraud. Edna's compiled evidence would be submitted to federal investigators looking into healthcare fraud in the region. But Clint wasn't done. These were external pressures, attacks from outside that the Griffiths could potentially weather with enough money and lawyers. He needed something more personal, something that would hurt them the way they tried to hurt Jake. He needed to hit them where they lived. The Griffith estate was in Clayton, an old money suburb west of the city. Clint had been there dozens of times for family gatherings, always feeling like an outsider among the marble statues and manicured gardens. He knew the layout, knew the security systems, or lack thereof. The Griffiths had always relied on their reputation and gates to keep them safe, never imagining someone might want to hurt them. That arrogance would be their downfall. On a Tuesday night, Clint visited the estate, not to break in. He'd never been forbidden from visiting, and the security guard waved him through when he explained he was there to pick up some of Jake's belongings that Vanessa had left behind. The guard didn't question it. Why would he? Clint was family. He walked through the grand foyer with its chandelier and sweeping staircase, climbed to the second floor where Stanley's study was located. The door was locked, but Clint had learned a lot working construction, including how to pick simple residential locks. Inside, he found exactly what he was looking for, Stanley's personal files. The man kept meticulous records of everything, a habit from his banking days. Contracts, financial statements, correspondence with lawyers and doctors and politicians. All of it carefully organized and criminally incriminating. Clint photographed everything. Every page, every document, every piece of evidence of the Griffiths' corrupt dealings. It took 2 hours, and his heart hammered the entire time, expecting someone to burst in and catch him. No one came. He locked the study behind him, walked back downstairs, thanked the security guard, and drove away with gigabytes of evidence on his phone. That night, he sat in his small house with Jake sleeping upstairs and Vanessa beside him on the couch, and he organized everything. Made copies, encrypted files, sent them to secure email accounts and cloud storage. Made sure that even if something happened to him, the evidence would survive. Are you sure about this? Vanessa asked. Her face was drawn, exhausted from weeks of stress. They're going to destroy us. You know that, right? Once this goes public, they'll use every resource they have. Let them try. Clint's voice was calm. They made one critical mistake, Vanessa. They underestimated me. They thought I was just some working class guy who got lucky marrying you. They never bothered to really see me. What do they not see? That I'm patient, that I pay attention, that I don't forget. He looked at her, and that I love my son more than they love their reputation. Vanessa leaned against him. I'm sorry for not seeing what they were, for letting them anywhere near Jake. Stop. This isn't your fault, isn't it? I knew what they were like. I knew they were controlling and manipulative. I just never thought they'd go this far. No one expects their parents to be capable of hurting their grandchild. Clint kissed the top of her head. But you're seeing it now. That's what matters. The story broke on a Monday morning. Brian Rivers held a press conference outside Mercy General Hospital, flanked by Dr. Reynolds and two other physicians who'd witnessed the Griffiths' inappropriate behavior over the years. He laid out everything: the bribed pharmacy employee, the falsified medical records, the pattern of the Griffith family using donations to manipulate hospital operations. By noon, the story was everywhere. Local news, national news, medical journals. The hospital's board announced an emergency investigation. Several administrators quietly resigned. On Tuesday, the financial fraud story dropped. Nina's journalist friend published a comprehensive expose on the Griffith Foundation, revealing years of embezzlement disguised as charitable giving. Money that was supposed to go to children's hospitals and education programs had been funneled into shell companies owned by Stanley's associates. Tax fraud, money laundering, it was all there. The IRS announced an audit within hours. On Wednesday, Edna McCarthy appeared on morning television, telling her story about her dead grandson and the Griffith family's role in covering up the medical malpractice that killed him. She was calm, dignified, and devastating. Other families came forward with similar stories, people the Griffiths had silenced or intimidated over the years. By Thursday, the FBI had opened an investigation into the foundation's finances. And on Friday, Clint delivered the final blow. He sent copies of Stanley's personal files to Detective Wade, to federal investigators, and to 3 separate news outlets. The documents proved everything: bribery, corruption, medical fraud, witness intimidation. They showed a decades-long pattern of the Griffiths using their wealth and influence to escape consequences while hurting anyone who got in their way. Stanley Griffith was arrested on Friday afternoon. Dolores was arrested an hour later. The charges included conspiracy to commit medical fraud, child endangerment, bribery, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Their bail was set at $5 million each. Clint watched the news coverage from his living room, Jake playing with blocks on the floor beside him. Vanessa sat on his other side, holding his hand so tightly he thought she might break his fingers. "It's really over," she whispered. "Not quite," Clint said. "The trial will take months. They'll fight every charge. But yeah, the important part's over. They can't hurt Jake anymore. That's what matters." On the screen, Stanley Griffith was being led out of his mansion in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled. He looked old, suddenly diminished. All his power and prestige stripped away in a matter of days. Dolores was crying, covering her face as photographers swarmed. Their lawyer was already talking about appeals, about misunderstandings, about their charitable works. It wouldn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. Public opinion had turned against them. Even their wealthy friends were distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with such a spectacular scandal. The Griffith legacy was destroyed, and Clint had destroyed it with nothing but patience, documentation, and a willingness to see the truth. The trial didn't happen for 8 months. The Griffiths' lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to delay, trying to suppress evidence, trying to find any angle that might save their clients. But federal prosecutors were relentless, and Detective Wade made sure every piece of evidence was properly documented and admissible. In the meantime, life continued. Jake started first grade, healthy and happy. Vanessa began therapy to process her family's betrayal and her own role in enabling their behavior for years. She also started divorce proceedings, not from Clint, but from her family's toxic influence. Nina moved back to St. Louis, and the two sisters grew closer than they'd been in decades. Clint returned to work at the construction firm. His boss, who'd been following the news, gave him a promotion, project director with a significant raise. "You've got a strategic mind," his boss said. "I should have recognized that years ago." Brian Rivers completed his residency despite the Griffiths' attempts to have him fired. He was offered a position at a different hospital and became something of a hero among medical ethics advocates. The young doctor who'd risked everything to protect a patient. Edna McCarthy, lived to see justice served. She died peacefully 3 months before the trial, but not before telling Clint that he'd given her grandson's death meaning. When the trial finally began, the prosecution's case was airtight. Witness after witness testified about the Griffiths pattern of corruption and manipulation. The bribed pharmacy employee pleaded guilty and testified against Stanley. Hospital administrators admitted to looking the other way due to donation pressures. Nina testified about the foundation's financial fraud, bringing documents that proved every accusation. And Clint testified about what they tried to do to Jake. He stood in the witness box and told the jury about rushing his sick son to the hospital, about the intern's desperate warning, about discovering his in-laws had tried to make Jake permanently ill to seize custody and control his inheritance. He kept his voice steady, factual. Let the evidence speak for itself. When the defense attorney tried to suggest he'd misinterpreted innocent actions, Clint simply asked, "Then why did they bribe a hospital employee to access medications my son wasn't prescribed? Why did they falsify medical records? Why did they have custody papers drawn up before Jake was even sick?" The attorney had no good answer. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, they found Stanley and Dolores Griffith guilty on all counts. Stanley was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Dolores got 12. Both would be eligible for parole, but only after serving a minimum of 10 years. The Griffith Foundation was dissolved, its remaining assets distributed to legitimate charities. The family's fortune was largely seized to pay fines and restitution to victims. The empire they'd spent generations building was gone. Clint was outside the courthouse when the sentencing was announced, holding Jake's hand. Vanessa stood on his other side, Nina beside her. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, but Clint only made one brief statement. "Justice was served today, not just for my son, but for everyone the Griffiths hurt over the years. I hope other families in similar situations know that power and money don't make you untouchable. The truth matters, evidence matters, and standing up for what's right matters." Then he took his family home. A year later, life had found a new normal. Jake was thriving in second grade, his respiratory issues long resolved. He'd forgotten most of the hospital stay, remembered only vaguely being sick. Clint and Vanessa had decided that was for the best. Someday they'd tell him the full story when he was old enough to understand. For now, he was just a happy kid who loved baseball and building Lego cities with his dad. Vanessa had completely severed ties with what remained of her family's social circle. She'd found work as a consultant for legitimate charitable foundations, helping them avoid the kind of corruption that had destroyed her parents' organization. It was meaningful work, and it helped her process her guilt over not seeing her family's true nature sooner. Nina opened an art gallery in the city. She displayed her own work and that of other local artists who'd been overlooked by the establishment. It was small, scrappy, and successful. She visited often, and Jake adored his aunt. Clint stayed at the construction firm, but took on consulting work on the side, helping people investigate suspected fraud or manipulation in medical, corporate, or personal situations. He had a reputation now. People called him when they needed someone who understood how to document evidence, build a case, and expose corruption. He never charged much. It wasn't about the money. On a Saturday afternoon in autumn, Clint sat in his backyard watching Jake play in the treehouse they'd finally finished building. Vanessa was beside him, reading a book. The air was crisp, leaves turning gold and red. "You ever regret it?" Vanessa asked suddenly, taking them down so completely. Clint considered the question. Did he regret destroying the Griffith family legacy? Sending his wife's parents to prison? Making enemies of some of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the city? "No," he said simply. "They tried to hurt our son. There's no coming back from that." "I know. She set down her book. "Sometimes I wonder if there was another way. Something less devastating." There wasn't. You know that, right? If we'd let the legal system handle it quietly, they'd have found a way to escape real consequences. They always did before. The only way to stop them was to expose them so thoroughly that no amount of money or influence could save them. Vanessa nodded slowly. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard, watching my parents in prison. Even after everything they did. They're your parents. It's okay to mourn what you thought they were. Clint took her hand, but they made their choices. They chose their pride and control over their family's well-being. Those consequences are on them, not you. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just a guy who loves his family and won't let anyone hurt them. He smiled slightly. Besides, I had good teachers. Your parents taught me exactly how manipulation and corruption work. I just used those lessons against them. Jake called from the treehouse, wanting them to see the flag he'd hung from the roof. They walked over together, praised his work, helped him secure the rope properly. Normal family stuff. The kind of moment the Griffiths had tried to steal from them. As the sun set, Clint thought about Brian Rivers' desperate warning in the hospital corridor, about Nina's courage in turning against her family, about Edna McCarthy's 7-year quest for justice, about all the people who'd helped him bring down the Griffiths. None of them had been powerful or wealthy, but they'd been honest, determined, and willing to stand up for what was right even when it cost them something. In the end, that had been enough. The Griffiths were gone, their reputation ruined, their wealth seized, their freedom taken. And Clint's family was safe, healthy, and together. He'd won, not through money or connections or power, but through patience, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to back down when his son's life was at stake. That was justice, real justice, and it was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.